Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be looking at, actually let me put you into a little scenario first of all. So I'm going to put these aside, and our discussion today is going to be what is our our additional level 2 monster going to be aside from the generic sprite monsters or Melfi monsters. So starting off, the scenario here is we have a starter in hand with no additional cards that are of use. Maybe they're all hand traps, maybe there's a Fenrir or something like that. So what can you do with just one starter? Well, first of all, during the draw phase, assuming you're going first, we're going to activate the starter to search out the blue. We'll take 1/1 from that, special that's out here. Then we're going to declare the blue effect to searching out Jet. And of course, we are just searching these cards out to the plus as many times as we can. Now, in main phase 1, we're going to special summon the Jet, declaring the effect to search out the smashes. We can also search out the starter here, or if you play double cross, you can search that as well, of course. Very standard, so this is in our hand now. And then we're going to overlay to play around Nib into our Gigantic. So the issue here now is once we go into our Gigantic, what do we want to summon off? Because summoning red or carrot gives us a negate in the form of like a spell or trap or monster negate, depending on which one you summon. But you don't get to go into sprint because you need another body to summon to link off. Well, you can link with red or carrot, but it kind of feels like a waste, especially if you're playing one of those. And instead you could be summoning those monsters off of starter instead during the next turn if you didn't search smashes. So in this scenario, we obviously want to bring out a card that does something additional aside from just link fodder. So we want something that's usable as link fodder and is also able to be used in other scenarios. So I have a couple of cards here. I'm going to go through all of them one by one. But first of all, let me talk about the top one, so Melfi Caddy. In this scenario here that I presented, we activated starter during the draw phase, which means we could not get drawed then when we searched off blue. And when we searched off Jet, we searched smashes, and in that scenario, there's a very good chance that we could have gotten drawed there. So under draw, you're no longer able to add the caddy off the Melfi of the Forest. So if you have an extender, you are able to then just special summon the caddy using Gigantic's effect, assuming it goes through. And then if you have another extender, you can normal summon or special summon or whatever monster, link those two off into sprint, and then summon maybe a mannequin cat using the two beavers that you summon off the angler. Now, aside from that, so caddy aside, that is just an additional way of getting caddy out. It just means you won't have to negate from the Melfi of the Forest, but I don't think the Melfi of the Forest is worthwhile summoning if you are under draw, just because the imperm, well, the Fiendish Chain effect is worse than a mannequin recursion effect. Aside from that, let's look at our options. So we have Red Resonator. Let me just clear the board here actually a little bit. No, I'll leave it here, it's fine. We have a Red Resonator. So this card is obviously a time card. When it's normal summoned, that effect is irrelevant. But when this card is special summoned, you can target one face of monster on the field, gain life points equal to the attack. And so it's just a life point gain on summon. You could potentially use this if you wanted to, I guess, play for time. But the issue with this, in my opinion, is typically with Sprite, you either OTK them in one turn, or you tend to just lose outright. In the grind game, this deck is not nearly as good as it used to be when it had Elf. It has a little bit of a grind game, especially if you end up searching the Nimble Beaver off the caddy. Maybe they already had the penny in hand, and so you could afford to search the Beaver, or sometimes an Omni Negate isn't needed, and so you can just search the Beaver instead of the caddy. So in those instances, if you recognize that you cannot break their board with your opening hand, maybe you drew all engine against like 16 different negates, it's probably just worthwhile just conceding and just going to game 2, which means that Red Resonator will very rarely ever come up if you play this properly, if you know the lines well, if you know what you can and can't do, when to Zeus, when not to Zeus, etc. If you know your deck well, you do not need this card, so I'd say just get rid of it. Now next, we have our two link related monsters, where if you link them off, you can summon them to your opponent's side of the field. So Click and Echo and Nightmare, Corruptor, Ibli. While I do this, actually, I'm just going to pull out another card from my side deck that I just thought about as well. But yeah, Nightmare, Corruptor, Ibli, and Click and Echo. When they're linked off, they both summon to your opponent's side of the field. you have to trigger them in graveyard, and that is one big key, right? You have to trigger them in the graveyard, which means they have to actually hit the graveyard when they're linked off to actually trigger to summon onto your opponent's side of the field. Otherwise, if they're banished under, you say you're under shifter, they will not resolve. This means that it's already a little bit worse, considering that this format, I believe that in the pure version, you have to main deck shifter, just for the Fire King decks. And additionally, I feel like the effects just aren't good enough nowadays. So Click and Echo in particular does not net you anything except hand advantage. And knowing what your opponent has in hand just isn't quite good enough when they have 46 different extenders in the, let's say, Fire King Snake Eye deck, right? They have so many ways of getting to engine, to getting to more extenders, more cards. And so I think Click and Echo just isn't worth it, especially when you're giving them another body on top of that. And then second, Ibli. Ibli is good here and there. It's particularly good against cash, but otherwise I'd say it's quite risky, especially again because they have a couple of different ways of extending. They also have, maybe they have some nice techs, right? Like Econ, maybe they run Droplet for some reason and you're just giving them another free body. So I don't think it's worth the risk of going neg several times just to get the Ibli out. Alright, next card we have up here, we have EMP, Meow Mine, and Soul Scissors. So I've been waiting a long time to talk about EMP Meow Mine because I've done a little bit of testing with it, and I might go back to it eventually because I have some like thoughts on it. Yeah, I think it all has to do with the ratio of how many cards we want to play that are non-engine versus, when I say engine, this isn't exactly engine, but it is a 2 as well, so it kind of helps our engine, right? So let's talk about Soul Scissors first because we'll get it out of the way. So in the previous couple formats, I ran this card because I liked it as another form of disruption the opponent would sometimes forget. This is a card that when it's sent, when a monster on the field is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon this from the graveyard once per turn, and then when it's summoned using this effect, well no, actually if it's summoned from the graveyard, so if you bring it back with Mannequin Cat, it will trigger it as well, but if you bring it back from the graveyard, you are able to then targeted pop a monster on your opponent's side of the field. So it's quite nice. It's another layer of interruption. On top of that, you can then overlay with another link monster into Gigantic to recur this effect, because this would normally get banished if you use the effect to summon itself, I believe. Let me just double check. Yeah, you can special summon this card but banish it when it leaves the field. Yeah, so because it's used as Xyz material, it doesn't technically count as the card itself. It counts as material leaving the field instead, which means the card does not get banished and you can kind of recur it. So the old combo would be Cerberus, where you pitch this, or maybe let's say you link off this card and something else into a Cerberus. You pop something, you bring back the Soul Scissors, pop another card, and then you overlay those into Gigantic. Obviously, the biggest issue this format with Soul Scissors is, first of all, that cards want to be popped, right? So first of all, actually, cards want to be popped, especially in the Fire King Snake Eye deck. If a fire gets popped, a lot of things can trigger, which is not something that you want. You'll be assisting them at that point. The second thing about this card is that Soul Scissors does target to pop, and again, targeting to pop is a bit of a risk in this meta just because they can Kirin dodge if they really need to keep the monster, and so you effectively don't get as much value as you would have playing another card instead. Now the second card that triggers from the graveyard is of course EMP Meow Mine. We'll go through the entire effect because I think I haven't gone through the entire effect yet on the channel, and there are some clarifications that I want to point out as well relating to this card. Alright, so the first effect to summon itself, you only need a link on either field or in either graveyard. And it's a non-activated effect to special summon itself, which means you can just put it down straight away without declaring it first in hand, like you would with, for example, Griffin Rider in the Adventure package. So the condition is just to have a link monster in either graveyard or on either field, which means that if you're going second, it should be quite easy to summon this, assuming you're playing against a link deck. Against some matchups, this will actually not do anything because maybe they just won't summon any links. One that I can think of in particular, let's say Pearly probably wouldn't usually end on one unless they had a lot of bodies. Another one I can think of is Labyrinth obviously they wouldn't go into the links until like later on in the game. Maybe they'll make a Muckracker or like an SP with a Clara and Roshka, something like that. Now the second effect that this card has is that if a link 2 monster specifically that you control is sent to the graveyard or banished face up, while this card is in your graveyard, except during the damage step. So during one of my previous videos, that was a bit rough, but during one of my previous videos, I had a match that I showcased where this card was in the graveyard and one of my monsters was destroyed by battle. I special summoned it back. So obviously that was an illegal move because at the time I wasn't aware that this was excluding the damage step, which makes this card a little bit worse. So what I can say about this is that, well, let's just continue with the effect first. And then you can banish this card, then target a card your opponent controls, bounce it to the hand. And then they're both hard once per turn, so you can only summon it that way once per turn, like if there's a link monster on the field or graveyard. And then you can only bounce once per turn as well after you banish. So what I can say about this card is I think that the non-activated special summon is great because it acts as another extender. Going first, it's a little bit less usable just because it's a bit harder to have those links on field or graveyard without playing into Nib. So if you try and play using this card as your form of extender, assuming that Sprint might get hand trapped and so you can still go into Gigantic using Meowmine, it does play into Nib quite badly, and so it's quite risky to do that line. So I think overall, if Meowmine was played, it's great as an extender, but the graveyard disruption isn't as good as I would like it to be, just because it's excluding the damage step. Otherwise, if you pair it up with a card, say like IP into an SP banish, those cards can trigger, but for that to happen, they would have to have multiple bodies on the field already for Meowmine to really put in work. Now, something that my Melbourne friend called Jacob mentioned is that Nibiru actually plays really well with the Meowmine. So let's say hypothetically you had this in the graveyard, you had your entire board set up, you have a Gigantic, you have a Mouthful of the Forest, you have an Arclight and a Sprint on board. Maybe a couple of things have triggered here and there because they're trying to break your board and you're trying to, stop them, right? Let's say you've gone through everything and you have nothing else. They're comboing off, they hit 5 summons, which is quite easy if they're trying to break your board and push through. You can then nib them. Now what nib does, assuming you still have your Sprint on the field, is that it will tribute everything off, including the Sprint, and then summon a token on this side of the field. Nib would be summoned as well, and then in a new chain you can banish the EMP Meowmine to then target the token and bounce it back. First of all, Nib is no longer currently being run in my main deck just because I think it's a little too situational outside of Fire King, Snake Eyes builds, or just pure Snake Eyes. For other decks that I frequently come across at my locals or in my area, this is generally just a dead card, and so I put it in the side. But it is preference. If your locals or your region has a lot more of like a spammy combo-y deck, then I think Nib could definitely be put in the main deck, and then it would definitely have a lot of synergy with Meowmine as well, assuming this goes off. That's about it that I have. I just feel like it's not good enough in terms of disruption because they would have to have multiple bodies on the field for everything to trigger, especially you having IP into an SP, which already banishes. And yeah, let's move on to the next card. But yeah, I'll definitely look back into this because I do want to explore a little bit more before just completely casting it aside. I might play it at 1 or 2, but I just feel like Hyperia does a better job right now. Next up is Wind Up Kitten. So Wind Up Kitten reads, once while face up in the field, you can target one monster your opponent controls, return that target to the hand. This was a card that kind of spiked a fair bit ago because one person or like a couple of people ran, I believe, in Tri-Brigade Sprite. Yeah, I don't quite remember anymore, but this reads as an ignition effect, which means it is extremely slow. It has to be your turn only that you can activate this effect. You cannot activate it during opponent's turn because it's not a quick effect or an on-summon trigger effect, making this far worse than the other options. There's not too much to talk about. You could like summon it off Gigantic, maybe if you're going second, and bounce back an opponent's monster. But first of all, your bouncing is not that strong. You do still have to target, and also it's ignition, so not that good. Capshell. So our final 2 cards, Capshell and Hyperia. I paired these 2 together because obviously they're both draw cards. Capshell reads as you can only use one of these following effects once per turn. So essentially it's going to draw your card if you interact with it in one way or another by using it as material or using it as tribute fodder. So if this card is tributed, you can draw one card. Funnily enough, that works with Nib as well. If this card is used as material for fusion, synchro, or link summon, you can then draw a card. And if this card was used as a material for an Xyz monster and then detached as material for an effect, then you can also draw a card. Now, my issue with Capshell compared to Hyperion is that Capshell has to be used as material first before you can draw one. So in the scenario where your hand is pretty bricky or pretty bad, I think Capshell is just not going to cut it, because obviously you won't be able to do anything else except summon the Capshell or just keep it in hand for the next turn. Whereas Hyperia is non-conditional and is an automatic draw one. Now, something else I want to quickly look at actually before I talk about the final card Hyperia, because I have nothing else to say about Capshell, is that you want to consider the the attribute, the types of all these monsters as well. Just because we play Mannequin Cat, there's potential that we can recur some of these from the graveyard as well. So Earth, Reptile is not the greatest. Earth is okay, like you have Fenrir, you have a bunch of other cards that can trigger for your Mannequin Cat. For your Mannequin Cat, but aside from that, you're normally looking at like lights or darks, because those monsters are typically quite rampant in the meta. Otherwise, in this current meta in particular, fires, pyros, etc., etc. So that's something you can consider while looking at your last card to add into the deck. Alright, so the last card, Hyperia, is, in my opinion, the best card in this format, just because it gets you a +1 draw, which is very important. A couple of reasons why it's so good. First of all, in a shifter deck, this is unaffected. It doesn't care about shifter at all, because obviously it just draws on summon. Second, you won't get drawed on this under shifter, so it's an additional reason why it plays into shifter so well. Draw is not a real card while shifter is live, which means this is literally just a 3+1. And a third reason is because if you cut out prosperity like the rest of us did, that means that you will be completely out of draw power, which means that Hyperia is your only form of drawing. Now, the reason for cutting prosperity is obviously because you want to OTK in one turn, because we cannot afford to just, break their board and then wait until the next turn, because they're probably going to kill us, or they're going to recur the entire board while we will have essentially nothing on field. So Hyperia, I think, is mandatory just because it gives you a +1, and it gives you that one extra shot, especially when going first. Let's say a scenario where you're going first, you're siding in like a bunch of maybe hand traps that are really good for the matchup, maybe a couple of floodgates. I don't know how many times I've drawn into this fun card here. In fact, it happened yesterday. Oh, and this right now is just a test card. I'll probably cut it out later. But I was just testing on the card. Definitely coming out of the list, actually. Yeah, this fun little card, 3 copies. Typically, I would not open up with it, and then Hyperia would actually draw me into it. So it's like our only form of draw power or search power, or not really search power, but like an additional chance at getting one of those game-changing floodgates. And as soon as you hit that, you get +1 off this. It just feels so good. Now, I want to talk about one downside that Hyperia does actually have, and that is that the effect is mandatory. There are some scenarios where you want to just make maybe like a Mannequin Cat to beat over an an SP, to then make a Zeus, and then you can board wipe. Now, Hyperia, that is without triggering effects, of course. Maybe I'll like go normal summon, Capshell, special Sprite Blue without using the effect, overlay into either Ninja Mosquito or a Mannequin Cat, attack, make a Zeus. Now, Hyperia does not allow me to do that, because let's say they have a Baron. With the Capshell plus the blue line, I would not be able to they would not be able to interact with me. They can't negate any effects if I don't activate anything. Whereas Hyperia stops you from sticking a level 2 on the board if they have an Omni Negate, just because it is mandatory, so you can't choose to not activate it. You can normal summon Hyperia, you have to activate the effect to draw one. If they choose to Baron there to pop it, well then your turn just kind of is over. So that's the only downside I see with Hyperia, but typically it's not too bad. And yeah, I hope that suffices as a video for you guys. I hope my explanations are quite clear on why we want to or don't want to run certain cards. If you have any questions as per usual or suggestions, let me know in the comments and I'll look into it. Alright, take care. Bye.